The bruise spreading across Natalie Owens' left eye was the color of a Nevada sunset, all purple and angry red. And when she stepped into the general store that September morning in 1878, she kept her chin high, despite the weight of shame trying to drag it down. She needed flour and coffee, nothing more, and she hoped to slip in and out before anyone could ask questions. She had no intention of answering truthfully. Unionville was a small town, barely 300 souls clinging to the eastern slope of the Humboldt Range, and gossip traveled faster than wildfire through sagebrush. The bell above the door announced her entrance with a cheerful jingle that felt like a betrayal, and she saw Mrs. Patterson's eyes widened from behind the counter before the older woman quickly looked away. "Morning," Natalie said quietly, moving toward the shelves lined with dry goods. Her fingers trembled as she reached for a sack of flour, and she cursed herself for the weakness. She was 22 years old, not some frightened child, but her husband Robert had a way of making her feel small and powerless that no amount of internal resolve could quite shake. "What happened to your eye, dear, Mrs. Patterson's voice was gentle, but Natalie could hear the curiosity beneath it. The lie came easily now, worn smooth by repetition. "I took a fall yesterday, tripped over the porch step like a fool. You know how clumsy I can be, Mrs. Patterson's expression said she did not know any such thing, but she nodded and began tallying up the purchases. The silence stretched between them, uncomfortable and knowing, until the bell chimed again and heavy footsteps crossed the wooden floor. Natalie did not need to turn around to know who had entered. She had learned to recognize people by the sound of their walk, a survival skill she had developed over the past year of marriage. These boots belonged to Cole Orion, the ranch foreman who worked for the Hendersons spread north of town. She had seen him around Unionville often enough, a tall man with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of creek water after a storm. He kept mostly to himself, but people spoke well of him, said he was fair and honest and good with horses. "Morning, Mrs. Patterson." His voice was deep and measured. "Need to pick up that order of nails and the saddle soap." "Of course, Cole. Give me just a moment." Natalie kept her face turned away, studying the coffee selection with far more interest than it warranted. She could feel his presence behind her, solid and somehow reassuring in a way that made her throat tight. She reached for a tin of coffee, and her sleeve rode up slightly, exposing the finger-shaped bruises that ringed her wrist like a grotesque bracelet. "Madam." His voice was closer now, and she startled, nearly dropping the coffee. "You need help reaching anything?" "No, thank you, I am fine." She pulled her sleeve down quickly, but not before she saw his eyes track the movement, then rise to her face. His expression shifted, something hardening in those storm-colored eyes as he took in the full extent of her injury. "That is quite a fall you must have taken." There was something in his tone that made her pulse quicken, a quiet skepticism that cut through her carefully constructed story like a knife through cotton. She met his gaze for just a moment, saw the questions there, and looked away. "Yes, quite clumsy of me. Must have been some porch step, to hit you square in the eye like that and grab hold of your wrist at the same time." Her breath caught. Mrs. Patterson had gone into the back room, leaving them alone in the front of the store, and suddenly the space felt too small, too intimate. She clutched the coffee tin to her chest like a shield. "I really must be going." "Where is your husband today, Mrs. Owens?" The question was casual, but his posture was anything but. He stood between her and the door, not blocking her exactly, but present in a way that demanded attention. "At home, working on the fence line." Another lie, but the truth was worse. Robert had ridden out before dawn, headed to the saloon in Buena Vista, and would not return until he had drunk his way through most of his wages. When he came home, he would be mean and looking for a fight, and she would be the most convenient target. Cole nodded slowly, as if she had confirmed something he already suspected. I have seen fence line injuries. Seen men get kicked by horses and thrown from saddles. I have even seen someone walk face first into a barn door in the dark. He took a step closer, and she resisted the urge to back away. But I have never seen a fall that leaves marks quite like yours. You are mistaken. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. I do not think I am, Mrs. Patterson emerged from the back, her arms full of Cole's order, and the moment shattered. Natalie practically threw money on the counter for her purchases and fled, leaving the older woman to count out change that she would never return to collect. The bright September sun felt too harsh after the dim interior of the store, and she stood on the boardwalk for a moment, trying to steady her breathing. She could not afford for people to know the truth. Robert had made that clear the first time he raised his hand to her, 6 months into their marriage. Her parents were dead, killed by influenza 3 years prior, and she had no siblings, no family to run to. The small house on the outskirts of Unionville was all she had, and without Robert's income from his sporadic work as a freighter, she would have nothing at all. That was what he told her, at least, when he wanted to remind her of her place. The walk home took 20 minutes, her boots kicking up dust on the unpaved road that led away from town. The house sat alone against the backdrop of sagebrush and distant mountains, a structure of weathered wood that needed paint and repairs Robert never seemed to have time for. She let herself in and set her purchases on the kitchen table, then moved to the small mirror hanging by the door. The bruise looked worse in the harsh light streaming through the window. Robert had been angry about something. She could not even remember what, and his fist had come out of nowhere. She had learned not to cry where he could see, learned to absorb the blows and make herself small and quiet until his rage burned itself out. Last night had been bad, but not the worst. The worst times left marks where clothing could not hide them. She touched her face gently, wincing at the tenderness, and tried to calculate how long it would take to fade. A week, perhaps 2. By then, Robert would probably have found another reason to be angry, and the cycle would begin again. A knock at the door made her jump, her heart hammering against her ribs. Robert never knocked, and they had no friends who might call unexpectedly. She opened the door a crack and found Cole Orion standing on her porch, his hat in his hands and his expression serious. Mr. Orion. What are you doing here? May I come in, Mrs. Owens? Just for a moment. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to send him away before Robert came home and found another man at their door. But something in his steady gaze made her step back and open the door wider. He entered carefully, as if aware that his size might be intimidating in the small space, and stood just inside the doorway. You should not be here, she said, wrapping her arms around herself. If my husband returns and finds you. I know what I am looking at, Cole said quietly. And I know you did not get those marks from falling. Tears pricked at her eyes and she blinked them back furiously. You know nothing about my life. I know a man who hits a woman is not a man at all. His voice was gentle but firm. And I know you do not have to live this way. What choice do I have? The words burst out of her before she could stop them, sharp and bitter. I have nowhere to go, no money of my own, no family. This house belongs to Robert. Everything belongs to Robert. I am his wife, and that means I stay. Cole turned his hat in his hands, his jaw tight. There are always choices, even when they do not seem like good ones. You could leave. Go to Carson City or San Francisco, make a new start. She laughed, a hollow sound. With what? The clothes on my back. I have no money, Mr. Orion. Robert controls every penny. And even if I did manage to leave, he would come after me. He has made that very clear. Then you need someone to stand between you and him." The offer hung in the air between them, and Natalie felt her throat tighten with emotion she could not name. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you care what happens to me? You do not know me. We have barely spoken a dozen words before today." Cole was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with something that sounded like old pain. "My mother used to have bruises like yours. My father was a hard man, quick with his fists and quicker with his temper. She stayed because she thought she had no choice, and she died when I was 12 years old. Fell down the stairs, they said, but I knew better." He met her eyes. "I was too young to help her then. But I am not too young anymore, and I will not stand by and watch another woman suffer the way she did." Natalie pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting the sob that threatened to escape. No one had ever offered to help her before. Most people in Unionville suspected the truth, she was sure, but they looked away and minded their own business. That was what people did in small towns, kept their noses out of other families' affairs even when those affairs turned violent. "He will kill you," she whispered. "Robert is not a big man, but he is mean, and he always carries a gun. If you interfere, he will not hesitate to use it. Let me worry about your husband." Cole set his hat on the table and looked around the small house, taking in the threadbare curtains and the crack in the window that had been stuffed with cloth. "Do you want to leave him, Mrs. Owens? If you could go somewhere safe, would you?" The question was so simple, but the answer felt impossibly complicated. She had spent a year telling herself that her marriage was not so bad, that other women had it worse, that she just needed to try harder to avoid setting Robert off. But looking at Cole Orion's earnest face, she felt something crack open inside her chest. "Yes," she said, and the word felt like a confession and a prayer all at once. "God help me, yes." Cole nodded as if she had confirmed something he already knew. "Then we are going to get you out of here. But we need to do it carefully, and we need to do it soon. When does your husband usually return from his trips? Tonight, probably. Sometimes not until tomorrow if he drinks himself unconscious. All right, I want you to pack whatever you can carry. Clothes, any personal items that matter to you. Be ready to leave at a moment's notice. I am going to arrange a place for you to stay, somewhere Robert cannot find you, and then we are going to make sure you get there safely." Natalie felt dizzy with the speed at which her life was tilting sideways. "Where? There is nowhere in Unionville he would not look." "Not Unionville," Cole agreed, "but I have friends in other places, people who will help." He reached out and gently took her hand, and the simple kindness of the touch nearly undid her. "You have to trust me, Mrs. Owens. Can you do that?" She looked down at their joined hands, at the way his calloused fingers completely engulfed her smaller ones. She barely knew this man, had no reason to believe he would keep his word, or that his plan would work. But she also knew with absolute certainty that if she stayed, Robert would eventually kill her. It might take months or years, but one day his fists would land wrong and she would not get back up. "Yes," she said, "I trust you." Cole stayed only a few minutes more, explaining that he needed to ride out to the Henderson ranch and make arrangements. He promised to return before nightfall and warned her to be ready to leave quickly if needed. After he left, Natalie stood in the empty house and felt the weight of her decision settle over her like a heavy blanket. She was going to leave her husband. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. She spent the afternoon packing a small canvas bag with her few possessions. 2 dresses, a spare set of undergarments, her mother's cameo brooch, and the Bible her father had given her on her 16th birthday. Everything she owned in the world fit in one bag, and the realization was both freeing and heartbreaking. She hid the bag under the bed and then set about making supper, trying to keep her hands busy so her mind would not spiral into panic. Robert did not come home that night, which meant he had found a place to sleep off his drinking in Buena Vista. Natalie lay awake in the darkness, listening to every sound, wondering if each creak and groan was her husband returning or Cole Orion coming to take her away. Neither happened, and she finally fell into an uneasy sleep just before dawn. The next morning brought no sign of Robert, which was both a relief and a source of anxiety. Cole appeared mid-morning, riding a sturdy bay gelding and leading a second horse behind him. Natalie saw him from the window and grabbed her bag, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "Is your husband here?" Cole asked as soon as she opened the door. "No, he stayed in Buena Vista." "Good, that gives us time." He gestured to the second horse, a gentle-looking mare with kind eyes. "Can you ride?" "Not well, but I can manage." "That will have to do. We need to leave now before he comes back." Natalie took one last look at the house that had been her prison for the past year. She felt no sadness at leaving it, only a strange sense of lightness, as if she were shedding a heavy coat she had been forced to wear. She locked the door out of habit, then climbed onto the mare with Cole's help. They rode north out of Unionville, following the old mining roads that wound through the Humboldt Range. Cole set a steady pace, not so fast that Natalie could not keep up, but quick enough to eat up the miles between them and town. The September sun was warm on her shoulders, and the air smelled of sage and dust and freedom. "Where are we going?" she asked after they had been riding for an hour. "Friend of mine runs a ranch about 15 miles from here, closer to the mountains. His wife is a good woman, understanding. They have agreed to let you stay with them for a while, until we can figure out a more permanent solution." "Why are you doing this?" The question had been burning in her chest since yesterday. "You could get in serious trouble for helping me. Robert might come after you, or the law might say you helped a wife abandon her husband." Cole was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the trail ahead. "I told you about my mother. What I did not tell you is that I swore on her grave I would never let another woman suffer the way she did if I had the power to stop it. I have carried that promise for 15 years, and I have kept it every time I have had the chance. This is no different." "This is very different," Natalie said softly. "You are risking a lot for a stranger." He turned to look at her then, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "You are not a stranger, Natalie Owens. Maybe we have not known each other long, but I knew the moment I saw those bruises that I was not going to walk away. Some things you just know." They rode in silence after that, but it was a comfortable silence, filled with the sound of hoofbeats and birdsong and the whisper of wind through the sage. Natalie found herself stealing glances at Cole when she thought he was not looking, trying to understand this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer. She had been too afraid to speak aloud. The ranch came into view just after noon, a sprawling collection of buildings nestled in a green valley where water ran year-round from mountain springs. Cattle dotted the hillsides, and smoke rose from the chimney of the main house. A woman emerged as they rode up, wiping her hands on her apron and smiling in welcome. "Cole, it is good to see you, and this must be Mrs. Owens." "Natalie, this is Margaret Henderson. She and her husband Daniel own this place." Margaret was perhaps 40, with graying hair and a face that spoke of strength and kindness in equal measure. She looked at Natalie's bruised face with sympathy but not pity, and something in Natalie's chest loosened slightly. "Come inside, dear. You look exhausted." "Cole, Daniel is out checking the north pasture, but he will be back for supper." The house was warm and clean, with the smell of fresh bread filling the air. Margaret showed Natalie to a small bedroom upstairs, simply furnished but comfortable, and left her alone to rest. Natalie sat on the edge of the bed, and finally allowed herself to cry. Great shaking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her soul. She cried for the girl she had been before marriage, for the year of fear and pain she had endured, and for the uncertain future that stretched out before her. When she had no tears left, she washed her face in the basin and went downstairs. Cole was sitting at the kitchen table with Margaret, speaking in low tones that cut off when Natalie entered. Margaret rose and poured her a cup of coffee, pressing it into her hands with a gentle smile. "You are safe here," Margaret said firmly. "No one will hurt you under this roof." "Thank you." Natalie's voice was hoarse from crying. "I do not know how I will ever repay your kindness." "There is nothing to repay. We help people when we can. That is what neighbors do." Cole stood, reaching for his hat. "I need to get back to town before people start asking questions. But I will come by in a few days to check on you if that is all right." Natalie nodded, suddenly not wanting him to leave. He had become a lifeline in the space of a day, the one person who had seen her suffering and chosen to do something about it. "Be careful. If Robert finds out you helped me." "Robert Owens does not scare me." Cole's voice was hard. "But I will be careful all the same, for your sake." After he left, Margaret kept Natalie busy with small tasks, showing her around the ranch and introducing her to the rhythm of life in a place where people worked hard and treated each other with respect. Daniel Henderson returned that evening, a big man with a booming laugh and gentle eyes, and he welcomed Natalie without asking uncomfortable questions about her circumstances. The days settled into a pattern. Natalie helped Margaret with cooking and cleaning, learning to bake bread and churn butter and mend clothes with neat, small stitches. The work was hard but satisfying, and for the first time in over a year, she went to bed at night without fear. Her bruises began to fade, the angry purple turning to yellow-green and finally disappearing altogether. Cole came by twice in the first week, always with some excuse about checking on Daniel's horses or bringing news from town. Natalie found herself watching for him, listening for the sound of his horse, and when he appeared, her heart would lift in a way that felt both wonderful and terrifying. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing while the sun set behind the mountains. "Has there been any word?" she asked one evening, meaning Robert, though she could not quite bring herself to say his name. "He has been making noise in town, asking questions. Mrs. Patterson told him she saw you leave with a stranger, but she did not mention my name. A few other people have claimed to see you heading toward Carson City." Did he believe them? Hard to say. Robert strikes me as the type who believes whatever is convenient for him. Cole's jaw tightened. "He went to the marshal, tried to claim you stole from him. Marshal Jenkins sent him on his way, said a wife leaving her husband was not a criminal matter." Natalie felt a rush of relief mixed with guilt. "I should not have involved all of you in this mess. You did not involve us. We chose to help." Cole reached over and took her hand, a gesture that had become increasingly common between them. "Besides, you are not a mess, Natalie. You are a woman who had the courage to leave a bad situation. That takes strength." She looked down at their joined hands, feeling the familiar warmth that spread through her whenever Cole touched her. Over the past 2 weeks, something had shifted between them. The initial connection born of rescue and gratitude had deepened into something more complex, more intimate. She found herself thinking about him constantly, remembering the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the sound of his laugh, the gentle strength in his hands. "Cole," she said softly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me, always. Why do you keep coming back here? You said you wanted to help me get away from Robert, and you did that. Your obligation is fulfilled. So why do you keep riding out here, spending your evenings talking to me?" Cole was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand. "I think you know why," he said finally, her breath caught. "Tell me anyway." He turned to face her fully, his storm-colored eyes intense in the fading light. "Because I cannot stop thinking about you. Because every time I ride away from this place, I start counting the hours until I can come back. Because when I saw you in that store with bruises on your face, something in me recognized something in you, and I have not been the same since." Natalie felt tears prick her eyes, but these were different from the ones she had shed 2 weeks ago. These were born of hope and longing and the terrifying possibility of happiness. "I am still married," she whispered. "That does not change just because I left. I know. And I know this is complicated and messy and probably all kinds of wrong. But I also know that life is short and uncertain, and when you find something real, you do not let it go just because it is inconvenient." He cupped her face gently with his free hand, careful of the fading bruises. "I am falling in love with you, Natalie Owens. Maybe I have been since the moment I saw you in that store, and I will wait as long as it takes for you to be free, truly free, if you think you might feel the same way." She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. "I do," she said. "I feel exactly the same way. And it scares me because everything is so uncertain, and I do not know how this can possibly work. We will figure it out." Cole leaned forward and pressed his forehead to hers, a gesture of intimacy that felt more profound than any kiss. "One day at a time, we will figure it out together." They sat like that as the stars began to appear overhead, holding each other in the gathering darkness. Natalie felt something shift inside her, the last walls of fear and self-protection beginning to crumble. She had spent so long just surviving that she had forgotten what it felt like to truly live, to want something beyond simply making it through another day. The peaceful interlude shattered 3 days later when Robert appeared at the Henderson ranch. Natalie was in the kitchen helping Margaret prepare supper when they heard shouting from outside. Her blood turned to ice at the sound of that familiar voice, slurred with drink and sharp with rage. "I know she is in there. Send out my wife." Daniel was out of the house in seconds, and Natalie could see him through the window, positioning himself between Robert and the front door. Margaret gripped her arm tightly. "Stay inside," Margaret ordered. "Daniel can handle this." But Natalie could not make herself look away from the window. Robert looked worse than she remembered, his clothes dirty and his face unshaven, eyes wild with fury. He had his gun drawn, waving it in Daniel's direction. "That is my wife you are harboring. You got no right to keep her from me." "I am not keeping anyone from anything," Daniel said calmly, though Natalie could see the tension in his shoulders. "If there is a woman on my property, she is here of her own free will. She belongs to me. We are married before God and the law." "A marriage certificate does not give you the right to beat a woman," Daniel said, and his voice was hard as iron. "Now I am going to ask you once to leave my property peacefully. After that, I will make you leave, and you will not like the method." Robert laughed, an ugly sound. "You threatening me, old man?" The sound of hoofbeats made everyone turn. Cole was riding hard toward the ranch, and Natalie's heart lurched with fear and relief in equal measure. He dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, striding toward Robert with purposeful steps. "Orion," Robert spat. "I should have known you had something to do with this. Probably been sniffing around my wife for months, waiting for a chance to steal her away." "I did not steal anything," Cole said, his voice deadly calm. "I helped a woman escape a dangerous situation. There is a difference. She is mine. She is a person, not property." Cole moved to stand beside Daniel, and together they presented a united front. "And she has made it clear she does not want to be with you anymore, so you have 2 choices. You can leave now and start filing for divorce like a civilized person, or you can keep making a fool of yourself with that gun and force us to take it away from you." Robert's hand trembled as he aimed the gun at Cole. "You turned her against me. We were fine until you came along." "You were beating her." Cole's control slipped, his voice rising. "I saw the bruises, Robert. Everyone in town has seen them at one point or another. You were not fine, and you were never going to be fine as long as she stayed with you." "I will kill you," Robert said, and for a moment Natalie believed he would actually pull the trigger. Time seemed to slow, every detail crystallizing with terrible clarity. Then Daniel moved, quick for a big man, knocking Robert's arm up just as the gun went off. The shot went wild, the bullet disappearing into the sky, and Cole was on Robert in an instant, wrestling the weapon away. It was over in seconds. Robert was on the ground, Cole's knee in his back and his arms pinned, while Daniel held the now empty gun. Margaret had already sent one of the ranch hands for the marshal, and Natalie stood frozen in the doorway, her whole body shaking. "Natalie." Robert twisted his head to look at her, and his expression was pleading. "Natalie, please, I am sorry. I will change, I swear it. Just come home with me, and we can forget all this happened." She looked at the man she had married 3 years ago, the man she had once thought she loved. He looked small and pathetic on the ground, nothing like the monster who had haunted her nightmares. And she realized with sudden, crystal clarity that she had never loved him, not really. She had loved the idea of not being alone, of having someone to take care of her after her parents died. But that was not love, and it certainly was not worth the price she had paid. "No," she said, and her voice was steady. "I am never coming back to you, Robert. Whatever we had is over." His expression twisted with rage again, but before he could speak, Marshal Jenkins arrived with 2 deputies. They hauled Robert to his feet and listened to Daniel's account of what had happened, nodding seriously as he described the threats and the gunshot. "Threatening people with a firearm is a crime," the marshal said, "and attempting to shoot someone is definitely a crime. You are looking at some time in jail, Robert, and probably a hefty fine on top of it." "What about my wife?" Robert demanded. "She abandoned me." "A woman leaving her husband is not illegal," Marshal Jenkins said tiredly, as if he had explained this before. "Especially when she has cause, which from what I hear, Mrs. Owens had plenty of. You want a divorce, you file for one legal-like, but you do not get to wave guns around about it." They took Robert away, still shouting threats and protests, and the sudden silence he left behind felt almost deafening. Natalie's legs gave out, and she would have fallen if Cole had not caught her, pulling her against his chest and holding her tightly while she shook. "It is over," he murmured against her hair. "He cannot hurt you any more." "He could have killed you," she said, her voice muffled against his shirt, "if Daniel had not moved when he did. But he did not. I am fine, you are fine, and Robert is going to be a guest of the county jail for the foreseeable future." Cole pulled back enough to look at her face, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "This is the beginning of your new life, Natalie. The real one, where you get to make your own choices and be your own person." Over the following weeks, life began to settle into a new normal. Robert was sentenced to 6 months in jail for assault with a deadly weapon, and word came that he was willing to sign divorce papers in exchange for Natalie agreeing not to press additional charges. She signed them without hesitation, and when the official decree came through 3 months later, she felt as if she could breathe fully for the first time in years. Cole had been true to his word, visiting regularly and never pushing for more than she was ready to give. But as autumn turned to winter and the first snows dusted the peaks of the Humboldt Range, Natalie found herself growing impatient with waiting. She was free now, truly free, and she wanted to start building the life she had been dreaming about. She rode into town one December morning, bundled against the cold, and went directly to the Henderson spread where she knew Cole would be working. She found him in the barn, repairing tack, and the smile that lit his face when he saw her made her heart skip a beat. "Natalie, I was not expecting you today. I know. I needed to talk to you about something important." She dismounted and came to stand in front of him, suddenly nervous despite her determination. "The divorce is final, I heard. How do you feel? Free, relieved, happy?" She took a breath, ready to move forward. Something flickered in his eyes, hope mixed with caution. "What exactly does moving forward mean to you?" "It means I am tired of waiting. I am tired of being careful and taking things slowly. I know what I want, Cole Orion, and I want you. I want to build a life with you, a real life, and I want to start now." Cole set down the piece of tack he had been holding and crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch reverent, and looked at her as if she were something precious and miraculous. "Are you sure? I know you have been through hell, and I do not want you to feel like you have to rush into anything." "I have never been more sure of anything in my life," she said firmly. "I love you. I have loved you since the day you refused to believe my lies about falling, since you looked at me and saw someone worth saving. And I want to marry you if you will have me. If I will have you." Cole laughed, the sound rich with joy and disbelief. "Natalie, I have been in love with you since the moment I saw you in that general store. I told myself I would wait as long as it took, even if it was years, because you were worth waiting for. So yes, God, yes, I will have you. I will marry you and spend the rest of my life making sure you know how precious you are." He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the perfunctory kisses Robert had occasionally bestowed. This was warmth and passion and promise all rolled together, a kiss that spoke of future and hope and love so deep it took her breath away. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Natalie was crying and laughing at the same time. "When?" she asked. "When can we get married?" "As soon as you want. Tomorrow, if we can find a preacher willing to do it." They were married 1 week later in the small church in Unionville, with Margaret and Daniel Henderson standing as witnesses. It was a simple ceremony, nothing like the elaborate wedding Natalie had endured with Robert, and it was perfect in its simplicity. She wore a new dress Margaret had helped her sew, pale blue calico with white lace at the collar, and Cole wore his best suit, his hair freshly trimmed, and his eyes never leaving her face. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Cole kissed her with a tenderness that made her want to weep with gratitude for this second chance at happiness. They held a small celebration at the Henderson ranch afterward, with good food and better company. And as the sun set over the mountains, Natalie felt a peace settle over her that she had never known was possible. Cole had saved enough money to buy a small parcel of land adjacent to the Henderson spread, and they spent the winter building a house together. It was hard work, made harder by the cold and the occasional snowstorm that swept down from the mountains, but Natalie had never been happier. She worked alongside Cole, learning to hammer nails and fit boards, and when spring finally arrived, they had a snug little cabin with 2 rooms and a stone fireplace and windows that let in the morning sun. "It is not much," Cole said on the day they moved in, looking around at the simple furnishings with a critical eye. "But it is ours, and I promise I will make it bigger and better as time goes on." "It is perfect," Natalie said, and she meant it with her whole heart. "It is everything I ever wanted." They settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. Cole continued working for Daniel Henderson, saving money toward the day when they could buy cattle and start their own herd, and Natalie kept house and helped Margaret with the bigger tasks on the ranch. The rhythm of work and rest, of shared meals and quiet evenings by the fire, felt like a healing balm on wounds Natalie had not realized ran so deep. The nightmares came less frequently now, the ones where Robert found her and dragged her back. When they did come, Cole would hold her until she stopped shaking, whispering reassurances and reminding her that she was safe. During the day, she found herself laughing more, smiling at small things, rediscovering the parts of herself that had been buried under fear and pain. Summer brought long days and hard work. Cole and Daniel were busy with the cattle, driving them to better grazing and preparing for the fall sale. Natalie tended a garden behind their house, coaxing vegetables from the rocky soil, and learned to can and preserve for the winter to come. Margaret became not just a friend but something like a sister, the kind of family Natalie had been missing since her parents died. One evening in late July, Natalie realized she had not had her monthly courses in some time. She sat down at the kitchen table and counted back carefully, her heart beginning to race as the implications sank in. When Cole came home that evening, dusty and tired from a long day, she met him at the door with news that made exhaustion vanish from his face in an instant. "Are you sure?" he asked, his hands gentle on her still flat stomach. "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor, but my body has never been irregular before, and I have been feeling strange in the mornings." Cole swept her up in his arms, spinning her around the small kitchen while she laughed and protested. "We are going to have a baby," he said wonderingly. "A real, actual baby. It would seem so." Natalie touched his face, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Are you happy?" Happy does not even begin to cover it. He set her down gently, as if she had suddenly become fragile. "You have given me everything, Natalie. A home, a purpose, and now this. I am the luckiest man alive." The doctor in Unionville confirmed what Natalie already knew and estimated the baby would arrive sometime in February. Cole became absurdly protective, fussing over her in ways that were equal parts endearing and exasperating. He insisted she rest more, eat more, work less, until Natalie finally had to sit him down and remind him that women had been having babies since the dawn of time, and she was perfectly capable of continuing her normal activities. "I just want to keep you safe," he said, and the vulnerability in his voice made her soften. "I am safe. We are safe. You made sure of that." She took his hand and placed it on her belly, which was just beginning to swell with new life. "This baby is going to have the best father in the world, because you already proved you know how to protect people you love." Winter came early that year, with heavy snows that blanketed the valley and made travel difficult. Natalie grew rounder as the months passed, and Cole added a small room onto their cabin to serve as a nursery. Margaret helped her sew tiny gowns and blankets, and Daniel carved a beautiful wooden cradle that rocked gently on curved runners. The baby came on a bitter cold night in February, arriving with the kind of speed that left everyone slightly stunned. Margaret served as midwife, her calm competence a steadying force as Natalie labored through the darkest hours before dawn. Cole paced the main room, wearing a path in the floorboards until Margaret finally took pity on him and let him stay. "You want to be here?" Margaret asked. "It is not usually done, but if Natalie agrees." "I want him here," Natalie gasped between contractions. "I want him to see." So Cole held her hand and wiped her forehead and spoke words of encouragement that probably did not make much sense, but meant everything nonetheless. And when the baby finally emerged with a lusty cry that spoke of healthy lungs and a strong will, Cole was the first person besides Margaret to hold his son. "A boy," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "We have a son, Natalie." They named him James, after Cole's father, a choice that surprised Margaret until Cole explained that, despite his father's faults, he had loved his mother in his own broken way. "I want to do better," Cole said. "I want James to grow up knowing that love does not have to hurt, that a father's hands are for protecting and building, not destroying." James grew quickly, a sturdy baby with his father's stormy eyes and his mother's determined chin. The cabin rang with his cries and coos and eventually his laughter, sounds that made even the hardest days worthwhile. Natalie had never imagined she could be this happy, had never dared to hope that life could be gentle and full of joy. On a warm spring evening when James was 6 months old, Natalie and Cole sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. James slept in his cradle nearby, one tiny fist curled against his cheek, and the world felt perfectly balanced. "Do you ever think about that day in the general store?" Natalie asked quietly. "About what might have happened if you had not spoken up?" Cole was silent for a moment, his arm around her shoulders. "I try not to. It is too terrible to contemplate. I would be dead by now," Natalie said simply. "I know it with absolute certainty. Robert would have eventually hit me one time too many, and that would have been the end of it. But you gave me a chance at life, real life, and I will never be able to thank you enough for that gift. You do not need to thank me." Cole pressed a kiss to her temple. "You saved yourself, Natalie. You were the one who had the courage to leave, to trust me when you had no reason to. All I did was open a door. You were the one who walked through it." "We saved each other," Natalie said. "That is how I choose to see it. You showed me I deserved better, and I gave you a chance to keep the promise you made to your mother. We both got something we needed." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge overhead. The future stretched out before them, full of promise and possibility. There would be hard times. Natalie knew that. Ranch life was never easy, and raising a family on the frontier came with its own challenges. But they would face those challenges together, and that made all the difference. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter into the world, a tiny perfect thing they named Rose after Natalie's mother. James was a devoted big brother, carefully watching over his sister with a seriousness that made his parents smile. The cabin expanded again, growing to accommodate their growing family, and Cole's dream of starting his own herd began to take shape as he saved and invested wisely. By the time James was 5 and Rose was 3, Cole and Natalie owned a small but thriving ranch. They had 20 head of cattle, a dozen chickens, 2 horses, and a stubborn milk cow that James had named Buttercup. The work was endless from sunup to sundown, but it was good work that left them tired but satisfied at the end of each day. Natalie sometimes thought about Robert, wondered what had become of him after he served his jail time. Word had filtered back that he had left Nevada, headed east toward Colorado, and she hoped he had found some measure of peace. She bore him no ill will anymore, just a distant sadness for the broken man who had made her life hell because he did not know any better. But mostly, she thought about the present and the future. She thought about the way Cole looked at her each morning as if she were still a miracle he could not quite believe in. She thought about James' endless questions about everything and Rose's infectious giggle. She thought about the garden she was planning for spring and the new barn Cole wanted to build before winter. One evening, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Cole pulled Natalie into his arms and held her close. "I love you," he said simply. "I know I say it all the time, but I want to make sure you never doubt it. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "I love you too," Natalie murmured against his chest. "More than I ever thought possible. You gave me a life worth living, Cole. You gave me a family and a home and a reason to wake up smiling every morning." "We built it together," Cole corrected gently. "This life, this family, this happiness, It belongs to both of us. And he was right, Natalie thought. They had built something beautiful from the ruins of her first marriage, something strong and true and lasting. The girl who had walked into a general store with a black eye she pretended came from a fall was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her own worth and refused to settle for anything less than real love. Years passed in the pleasant blur that comes with a happy life. James grew tall and strong, learning everything his father could teach him about ranching and horses and treating people with respect. Rose became a bright, curious child who asked even more questions than her brother and had an uncanny way with animals. A third child arrived, another boy they named Daniel after the man who had helped save Natalie's life, and the cabin expanded yet again to accommodate their growing brood. By 1890, Cole and Natalie Orion were considered pillars of the community. Their ranch was one of the most successful in the area, known for producing healthy cattle and good horses. But more than that, they were known for their kindness and their willingness to help neighbors in need. Natalie, in particular, became a quiet refuge for women in difficult situations, offering advice and support and, when necessary, a safe place to stay. She never forgot what it felt like to be trapped and afraid, and she made it her mission to ensure that other women knew they had options. Cole supported her fully, just as he supported everything she did, and together they helped more than one woman find the courage to leave a dangerous situation. On their 15th anniversary, Cole took Natalie back to the spot where they had first spoken, the general store in Unionville that had been the unlikely setting for the beginning of their love story. Mrs. Patterson had long since passed away, and the store was under new ownership, but the building looked much the same. "You remember what I said to you that day?" Cole asked, his hand warm in hers. "You said my fall must have been quite something, to hit me in the eye and grab my wrist at the same time." Natalie smiled at the memory. "You saw right through my lies. I saw a woman who needed help, even if she could not ask for it directly." Cole pulled her close, right there on the street where anyone could see. "And I saw someone worth fighting for. You have spent 15 years proving that every single day," Natalie said. "You are a good man, Cole Orion, the best man I have ever known." They stood there for a moment, wrapped in each other's arms while the town bustled around them. A young woman passed by, her eyes downcast and a bruise on her cheek, and Natalie's heart clenched with remembered pain. She caught the woman's eye and held it for a moment, trying to communicate without words that there was help available if she needed it. The woman hurried on, but Natalie saw her glance back once, saw something flicker in her expression that might have been hope. She made a mental note to find out who the woman was and where she lived, to make sure she knew she had options if her situation was what it appeared to be. "You are thinking about helping her," Cole said. "It was not a question. I have to. You know I do." "I know." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "It is one of the many reasons I love you. You never forget where you came from, and you never stop trying to help others find their way to safety." They walked home hand in hand as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The children would be waiting for them, probably driving Margaret crazy with their energy, and there would be supper to cook and chores to finish before bed. It was an ordinary evening in an ordinary life, and Natalie treasured every moment of that ordinariness, because she knew better than most how precious it was to feel safe in your own home, to go to bed without fear and wake without dread. She knew what it cost to build a life of peace and love, and she never took a single day of it for granted. As they crested the hill that led to their ranch, Natalie paused to look back at the valley spread out below. Unionville glowed golden in the last light of day, and smoke rose from dozens of chimneys where families gathered for evening meals. It was beautiful and imperfect, this life they had built, full of hard work and occasional heartache, but also overflowing with love and laughter and hope. "Thank you," she said softly. Cole looked at her quizzically. "For what?" "For seeing me. For believing me when I said I fell, or rather, for not believing me and caring enough to do something about it. For being brave enough to stand between me and danger. For loving me even when I was too broken to believe I deserved love. For giving me this life, this family, this happiness. For everything." Cole's eyes were suspiciously bright in the fading light. "You gave me all of that right back, Natalie. Before you, I was just going through the motions, working and existing but not really living. You taught me what it means to build something real, something lasting. You gave me a reason to come home at night and a reason to get up in the morning. So if we are exchanging thanks, then we are even." They walked the rest of the way home in silence, but it was the comfortable silence of two people who understood each other completely. The children burst out of the house when they arrived, James and Rose and little Daniel all clamoring for attention and talking over each other about their day. Natalie gathered them close, breathing in the smell of sun and dust and childhood, and felt her heart swell with gratitude so profound it bordered on prayer. This was her life now. Not the nightmare she had endured with Robert, but this beautiful, messy, joyful reality where she was loved and valued and safe. It had started with one man who refused to look away from suffering, who had the courage to act when action was needed. But it had grown into something neither of them could have predicted, a love story written in the language of everyday kindness and enduring commitment. As the years continued to pass, Cole and Natalie grew old together in the way of people who have weathered storms and emerged stronger for it. Their children grew and eventually brought home partners of their own, and grandchildren arrived to fill the ranch with new life and laughter. James took over the day-to-day running of the ranch when Cole's joints began to ache too badly to work from dawn to dusk, and Rose married a kind man from town who treated her with the respect she deserved. Daniel, their youngest, surprised everyone by becoming a deputy marshal, dedicated to protecting people who could not protect themselves. Natalie knew where that calling came from, knew her son had heard the story of how his parents met, and decided to make it his life's work to help others the way his father had helped his mother. On their 30th anniversary, Cole and Natalie sat on the porch of their house, watching the sunset paint the mountains in familiar shades of glory. They were both gray now, lines etched deep around their eyes and mouths, but Cole's eyes still lit up when he looked at his wife, and Natalie's heart still skipped a beat when he reached for her hand. "Do you ever regret it?" Cole asked suddenly. "Leaving with me that day? Taking such a huge risk on a man you barely knew?" Natalie laughed, the sound rich and full. "Not for a single second. That was the best decision I ever made, Cole Orion. You gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams." "We gave each other that life," Cole corrected, as he always did. "I would be nothing without you, Natalie. You know that. I do know it. Just as you would remind me that I would have found my way eventually, even without you." She squeezed his hand gently. "But I am so grateful I did not have to do it alone. I am grateful for every day we have had together, and I am grateful for all the days still to come." They sat in peaceful silence as the stars began to emerge overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first tentative steps toward each other all those years ago. The ranch was quiet now, the children grown and gone to their own homes, but it was a satisfied quiet, the peace that comes from a life well lived and love well given. Cole and Natalie Orion lived for many more years, growing old together in the house they had built with their own hands. They never stopped holding hands when they walked, Never stopped stealing kisses when they thought no one was looking. Never stopped treating each other with the tenderness and respect that had defined their marriage from the very beginning. When Cole finally passed away at the age of 76, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, his last words were for Natalie. "Thank you," he whispered, his hand in hers, "for saying yes, for taking a chance on me, for giving me the best life any man could hope for." Natalie held him as he slipped away, her tears falling on his weathered face, and whispered back, "Thank you for saving me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for showing me what a real marriage could be." She lived 2 more years after that, surrounded by family who adored her and a community that respected her. She spent those years telling stories to her grandchildren, making sure they knew the importance of standing up for people who could not stand up for themselves, of offering help even when it was inconvenient or difficult, of choosing courage over comfort. And she made sure they knew the story of how she and their grandfather had met, how a black eye she tried to pass off as a fall had led to the great love story of her life. She wanted them to understand that sometimes the darkest moments could lead to the brightest futures, if you were brave enough to accept help and strong enough to believe you deserved better. When Natalie finally joined Cole in 1916, the entire town of Unionville turned out for her funeral. People spoke of her kindness and her strength, of the countless women she had helped over the years, of the life she had built from the ashes of a terrible first marriage. But mostly they spoke of the love she and Cole had shared, a love so deep and true that it had transformed not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone around them. Their grandchildren would tell the story for years to come, passing it down through generations like a treasured heirloom. The story of how a cowboy saw a woman pretending her black eye came from a fall, did not believe her, and made her safe. And in making her safe, he found his own salvation, and together they built a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. It was a story of courage and compassion, of standing up against injustice and fighting for those who could not fight for themselves. But most of all, it was a story of love, the kind of love that changes everything, that heals old wounds and makes new beginnings possible. And in the telling and retelling, it inspired countless others to believe that no matter how dark the present might seem, a brighter future was always possible if you were brave enough to reach for it.